Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of America.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is Year Zero, the show that revolutionizes personal engagement in the world and fortification of your life. Let's get to it. We're brought to you by Fox & Sons, foxandsons.com, the best place to get your BBC. I never start my day with anything less than BBC in my mouth, and I suggest if you like BBC, you go to foxandsons.com, get that big bold coffee, and put it in your mouth. foxandsons.com, promo code 0 at checkout for 18% off on any order $25 or more. That's foxandsons.com for that BBC big bold coffee. Put it in your mouth, baby. And the Marc Clair Show. If you enjoyed Marc Clair with Lions of Liberty, you're going to really dig the Marc Clair Show. Marc Clair has gone beyond the realm of politics to dig into the esoteric meaning of life in all sorts of different avenues, whether it be entrepreneurship, ghosts, goblins, Bigfoot, demonic entities, religion. Marc Clair is diving into all of it, and he's not afraid to tackle any task. So go check out the Marc Clair Show. Thank you, as always, Tom Burton, for the music. And you can find this show and many more at the Libertarian Institute.org. That's the Libertarianinstitute.org. That's where you'll find me, Patrick McFarlane, Scott Horton, Keith Knight, Will Porter, Kyle Anzalone, and a host of other writers like Kim Robinson. Go to libertarianinstitute.org and keep track of everything that we are doing for you.
Sounds good, man.
All right. We're back to talk more Israel and Hamas. And tonight we got Kyle Anzalone, the great. How are you doing, man?
Doing pretty good, Tommy. Thanks for having me back on. It's been a while.
It has been a while, man. It has been a while. I've been kind of on hiatus, too, for most of the summer because it's been like a nuclear bomb went off in my life. Beatrix got bit by a copperhead. That left her unable to walk for a couple of months. And then my son got shot in the arm, and he had to have the tendon to his thumb reconstructed. And then I got sick as hell. And Beatrix went to South Africa and left me here to be sick by myself. And then when she got back, she was sick as hell. So it's been kind of wild here since July. So,
all right. Well, I'm glad you're doing shows, and I hope things are settling down for you.
Yeah, it seems that way. It seems that way. I just got to get my mind back on track. So
yeah, well, it's all hard to keep up with so much happening in the world.
It is. But let's so we had this story pop up, I guess it was last night. I didn't hear about it till this morning, about a hospital. So what happened with that? Because I've heard you have people like Crystal Ball on Breaking Points still saying all day today that it was a hospital got bombed and there were 500 people that got killed. And then I heard on the Hill Rising, they were actually reporting that it hit a parking lot, and they were unsure as to the number of casualties, the number of people that were injured. And then Tim Pool's running around suggesting that a parking lot got hit and nobody got injured or killed. So what's happening here? What happened? What do we know about this incident?
Yeah, so at least it was last night. I'm not sure exactly. It was dark in Gaza when it happened, so it was sometime during the night, but it was pretty late last night, Eastern Coast time, that the reports emerged, and you could see Reuters, New York Times, and others reported that an Israeli airstrike had hit a hospital in Gaza. the initial estimates of dead were 200 to 300, and that was pretty quickly revised to 500. And then there started to reports started to surface, and the Israeli government started to put out claims that, oh no, this wasn't an Israeli airstrike. It was a misfired or intercepted Hamas rocket that caused this damage. And so initially, the report sounded an awful lot like the hospital building itself, which, you know, if anybody goes to, like, most hospitals now, you know, it's not a single building, right? It's like kind of a campus. You know, you got administrative buildings, a parking garage, maybe. You're going to have some doctor's offices, a cancer oncology ward. You know, this is one of the bigger hospitals in Gaza. And so, you know, it makes it sound like at least a building in this complex was actually hit, and likely one that, you know, there's patients in. And so once, you know, it's daylight in Gaza, we actually have pictures of what happened. And it's, you know, clear that, you know, it's kind of a parking lot, but kind of not. I would call it, and I described it on my show, as a courtyard, which, you know, there's like a small area that, like, you know, probably the ER doctors or somebody are parked in. Maybe, you know, emergency vehicles, you know, kind of use this driveway. There's a few parking spots there, but it's mostly a grassy area. It looks like there's a courtyard, and it's, you know, surrounded by buildings that appear to be a part of the hospital complex. And so, you know, to say that it hit the parking lot, like, you know, somebody like hit the outskirts of a Walmart parking lot and the building itself was barely damaged,
right?
You know, it is very misleading. But also everybody, you know, who continues to claim that the hospital, you know, that the building was hit, I think that's also misleading. Now, of course, if you have a bomb go off in the courtyard, it's going to do some damage to the building itself. My understanding is that windows were blown out and stuff like this, although, you know, I haven't seen like a video tour of the hospital to know for sure. And of course, a part of that is because Israel has cut off the electricity, the water, the fuel, and the internet for Gaza. And so, you know, people's ability to get messages out is pretty limited. A lot of people are reporting that they can no longer charge their phones, and you know, they just don't have access to internet to upload this information. So I guess it could be that in the coming days, we really do get a lot of new videos coming out purporting to show what happened here, because, you know, there's not a lot right now. There's one video that was apparently verified by the Washington Post. And, you know, to my, you know, kind of the way I look at it is that the Washington Post verifying this video that seems to show a high-powered missile being the result of this strike would certainly seem to me to kind of be against what the I think the natural interests of the Washington Post are. So I'm tempted to kind of believe that this is actually a video of the strike on the hospital. And that would seem, you know, to me to show, or at least, you know, give evidence to that it was an Israeli strike. However, I think a lot of people are pointing to the lack of damage in this hospital courtyard, you know, parking lot, whatever you want to call it, as to, you know, this being evidence that it's a Hamas rocket. Now, the problem with that is, and I talked to somebody, you know, who's very familiar with, you know, weapons, bombs, stuff like that. He works on JDAMs and the military, and he says, look, you know, it's impossible to look at a crater and say this was or wasn't, you know, a U.S. made bomb, an Israeli bomb, because you know, they're designed to do different things. Some bombs are designed to be bunker busters, which means, you know, they try to create the biggest crater possible and impact under the surface. You have bombs that are designed to impact on explosion, and then you have other bombs that are meant to impact, you know, 5, 10, 15, whatever feet before they hit the ground, because you're looking to, you know, create a different kind of explosion for a different reason. So I don't think that the evidence of the picture of the courtyard really points one way or another, that if it was a Israeli, or the Israeli government is not saying that was Hamas. They're saying it's the Palestinian Islamic Jihad that carried out the rocket strike that was either shot down or misfired and caused this. And I think if you look at the courtyard, and I've seen, you know, a lot of people in the military say, you know, you really can't tell either way. It's not impossible that it wasn't a Hamas a rocket, but it's certainly possible that was also an Israeli missile bomb of some kind. Not every single bomb is a 2,500-pound JDAM meant to hit a subterranean target, right? That's going to create this giant impact crater. There are 500, 250-pound bombs that are meant to explode in the air and not do a lot of damage to the surface below, but do a lot, kill a lot of people. And I should mention here, so a lot of people are saying that, oh, this didn't hit the hospital, and that's somehow proof that that the Palestinian Health Authority, I think, put out today, Health Ministry, whatever they want to call themselves, that the number of dead was 471, 28 in serious condition, and then a few thousand others wounded. And so people look at a picture of this courtyard and say, oh, well, it didn't happen inside. The damage to the surrounding area isn't that extensive. And so we don't think that, that 500 people died. And, I want to remind people that this was one of the largest hospitals, if not the largest hospital that was still operating in North Gaza. There are people being bombed, blown up, trapped under rubble, freed from under rubble all the time. And so, if you pull your grandma out from under the rubble, you and your cousins and everybody are, bringing her to the hospital. And so I'm sure there's a lot of people kind of standing around outside the hospital waiting to hear news about their loved ones. There's people, trying to get into the hospital who maybe don't have serious enough injuries to be seen, but have injuries that are so serious that they can't say flee North Gaza to South Gaza as Israel has instructed. I'm sure there's people who think that, look, if Israel is going to carpet bomb North Gaza, the one place they aren't going to bomb is going to be the hospital. And so they end up camping out in the courtyard. Orphan children, things like that are probably kind of just all congregating and ending up here. And so it's very possible that this courtyard was absolutely packed full of people when this bomb went off. And so, for everybody saying, oh, there's no way 500 people didn't die, there are some images from that last night that it was a lot of bodies. It was a mass casualty event. There's no denying that. Now, 500 people is an awful lot. And when you have, 500 people die in an explosion, or even 100 people die in an explosion, it's really dark to think about, but it probably takes a while to figure out, where all these different arms and legs go, and, pieces that are missing and will never be found, and how you kind of calculate that. The one of the largest terror attacks, I think the second largest terror attack in African history, was on the side of the road. I believe it was either 2015 or 2016 in Mogadishu. Some guy who drove like 2,000 pounds in some large truck worth of explosives and set them off on the side of the road, where thousands and thousands of people were living as refugees. And, the estimate for the number of dead is like 600 to 1,000, because so many people were literally vaporized, by the explosion. And so for people who really want to try to get into the, it probably wasn't actually 500, I'm sure it's going to take a long time before they actually know. It seems pretty clear to me that the number is in the hundreds, and we're not talking about like 100 even or something like that. There are a lot of deaths from this explosion, whatever caused it. And there are still a lot of people saying for certain that they know that this was either an Israeli missile bomb of some kind or a Hamas rocket. And I don't see the clear evidence either way. I think the evidence would suggest that was an Israeli missile, and there's a couple reasons I have for that. One is Israel has hit this region in the past. Israel has warned North Gaza in general, and this particular hospital, to evacuate or they would strike it. So, they threatened to bomb this hospital, and then the hospital gets bombed. The first place you should go is the Israeli government to start asking questions. But a couple other things that are highly suspicious is that the Israeli government has put out several pieces of what they claim to be evidence that turned out to be false. And so they posted these videos that were from either after the explosion, the strike on the hospital, or were from like 2022. There was a call that they put out that even mainstream U.S. news sources like CBS News are saying was fabricated. And so you would have to ask yourself, why would Israel make up evidence if Hamas did it? You know what I mean? If President Joe Biden went to Israel today, and I think this is a huge part of it. And Tommy, if you want me to stop here and stop rambling, you want to
No,
like
go
direct
ahead.
me.
No,
Okay,
go ahead.
so
Man.
President Biden visited Israel this morning, and on his way to Israel, you got the plane full of press, and the press secretary will usually take a couple questions on these trips. I think it was Kirby. I don't think it was the chick. I think John Kirby told the press corps that they didn't have confirmation one way or another on who was responsible for this, which they would have to have really, really solid confirmation and approval from Tel Aviv before they actually went out and said directly that Tel Aviv was behind the strike, especially not as Biden's on his way. I mean, that would be an absolute PR nightmare. And so when Biden's in Israel, he says that I've seen evidence, and this evidence, I think he says like it was the other team. To Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, he says it was the other team that did the hospital
Right.
strike.
Yeah,
And
I heard
so
that. Which I thought was a weird way of phrasing it.
It really was, but there was a couple other really weird things Biden did. And so look, this is an old man who's traveling to the Middle East, probably on somewhat unexpected trip. Maybe he ate a little too much ice cream. For somebody that age, that will really impact your mental facilities. And so he was not sharp on this trip. There was that. He was trying to tell an anecdote that his Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, had apparently told him, and he realizes he can't remember it and just completely bails in the middle of the press conference.
The thing.
It was honestly worse than that. And then there's another time where they're asking him questions, and he's just mumbling, like nonsensically mumbling. And so Biden was not very sharp on this trip. You would also think the White House would have told him not to make any statements or believe anything that Netanyahu said, because it was very recently that Biden said that he had seen evidence from the Israelis, or had been assured that there was evidence from the Israelis about the 40 beheaded babies. And then, the White House had later come out and kind of admit that, they don't have that evidence, and that evidence hasn't emerged. And look, that is the most horrific thing that could happen. And so, it's not to downplay what Hamas did to say that they didn't behead babies, which is, what some of the Zionists on Twitter like to paint it as, the Ben Shapiro types. They really like to portray it as that if you don't buy into this narrative, that, every piece of Israeli propaganda is true. It's just like, in the early days of the war in Ukraine, when I was saying that, like, guys, it doesn't make sense that there's this Ukrainian fighter pilot that's just going out there and wiping out the Russian warplanes. The ghost of Kiev does not exist. They bomb the runways. Are you serious? They're not going to let this guy keep getting into more and more planes and ridiculous things. Like it was something that obviously wasn't true on the face of it, and yet the U.S. media reported it. And if you didn't repeat it and you didn't believe it, you loved Vladimir Putin. You wanted the invasion to happen. You were, kind of happy about what was going on in Ukraine, and you were a traitor to your country, even though the war was going on in Ukraine. And so,
let me stop you there for a second, though, because I want to back up a little bit on some of this stuff about this hospital. So, we had I heard something about a suspicious press conference where they had like some dude like sitting in front of the podium holding a dead child, and then they had like sheet covered bodies that with blood spattered on it. It sounded kind of like the whole Syrian gas attack like set up, like the way they set that whole scene up. It just, something about it just rang kind of like weird to me. I didn't see it personally, but I heard people describing it. Did you see that?
Yeah, so I saw it looked like there's probably 4 to 5, at least 2, but I think like 4 to 5 different kind of officials, either for the hospital, doctors, or something like that, gave interviews. And now my understanding is basically in Gaza, the bodies have piled up past where they could put them. They're burying people in mass graves at this point. They're throwing people in ice cream trucks. they're stacked up like a pile of wood in the morgues and things like this. And so, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if they for like propaganda reasons, they have all these bodies taped up around where they're giving the press conference. I don't like it, but at the same time, I kind of understand that this is a way that they're trying to show they're dead, especially because look, for myself and essentially everyone else in America, we don't speak Arabic. And so, the words that appear on the video that claim to be what this guy is saying could be absolutely fabricated. And so at least, you do have to look at him, this man in Gaza, are these exasperated doctors and see they're absolutely surrounded by bodies. And you at least have to recognize that tragedy happened. And so, I do agree with you. It's kind of weird, although I feel like I see things like that quite often in the Middle East, just in general, where they'll give press conferences, surrounded by their dead. And I do wonder if it's, a way to communicate to people who don't speak their language, about it. So,
yeah. I wasn't sure. Like I never seen, the only time I could think of ever seeing anything like that was the Syrian gas attack, like whole thing. And I was like, I don't know if I necessarily buy all that, but okay. If you've seen other instances like that, then okay, fine. I don't know. Maybe it's a cultural
there's
thing.
Not a ton of instances where you have, hundreds of dead bodies either. I mean, it looks a lot different if there's, 5-10 dead bodies, but for example, in Yemen, after the Saudis blew up that school bus full of children, the Yemenis did like a press conference with like 50 caskets of, small children's caskets laid out.
Okay.
And so again, it doesn't look like this because it's usually not in the middle of a war zone where everybody's being bombed. You have hundreds of people dead and you already have more bodies than you know what to do with. But I don't think this was that uncommon looking to me, at least to me. And if somebody else, if Dave DeCamp was said like, yeah, that was kind of strange too, and disagrees with me, then that could also be the case, but I just didn't think so.
Okay. When we're looking at, so when Biden showed up and he did all this, now I've seen reports that there have been 19,000 American troops sent to Israel. Is this accurate? Like what's going on here?
So my guess is when people say 19,000 troops, they're talking about all the sailors on the, so the U.S. has sent 2 aircraft carrier strike groups to the Eastern Mediterranean Sea.
Right.
And so my guess is that people are counting all of those troops as being sent to Israel. And in a very real sense, they are. I mean, they are to some extent being put in harm's way, and they are there to potentially fight a war on behalf of Israel. And so in a way, yes, but there are not, so that many American soldiers on the ground in Israel. I have seen videos that, purport to show that, there are some American soldiers on the ground, looks like special forces guys. I wouldn't be surprised if this was the case, particularly if they are trying to prevent the Israelis from carrying out airstrikes on places where they think there are American hostages. That's what my guess is that that's what the American troops should they be like kind of in the decision-making kind of war thing. That's one of the primary things they're doing. I'm sure they're also passing the Israelis intelligence and helping them pick other various targets. But I would imagine that they are trying to at least steer the Israelis away from carrying out strikes that could kill Americans.
I would also imagine that when the ground invasion actually does take place, which from what I understand, they've had some weather that's prevented that from happening here recently. But when it actually does take place, that there will be like special forces groups involved in trying to rescue the American hostages.
That's very possible. My understanding is that kind of historically, Israel doesn't like having a lot of foreign troops on Israeli soil and doesn't like relying on foreign troops. And so my guess is that they would want to downplay the American role. And there's probably incentives in the White House for keeping Americans, generally speaking, out of harm's way. And so, yeah, I do think it's possible that they end up on the ground, in Gaza. I'm not sure like how high risk situation they'll be put in, but America does have some very elite special operators who, once things start to go down in Gaza, I could see being sent in to try to do like particular hostage rescues or something like that. That certainly isn't impossible.
What's the potential? What's the potential of American troops going in through Egypt and coming up through into South Gaza to help with the refugee crisis down there?
I mean, it's a good question. I don't know. I don't know like what kind of success they would have trying to enter Gaza from that direction. It might be kind of obvious, because nobody's coming in right now. And so it may be easier for the American troops to either enter Gaza, with Israeli flights, helicopters, something like that, or on the ground behind, heavier Israeli infantry forces that enter Gaza first. So I suppose it's not impossible, but Israel is carrying out a lot of airstrikes in Gaza. And so I would have to imagine that would impact, the U.S. going in. And they have been carrying out airstrikes in particular on the Rafah border crossing, and that is the border crossing between Gaza and in Egypt.
Right. Yeah. I was just wondering that because I remember like one of my buddies who was in the Navy, he had told me that one of the missions he went on was actually to offer aid to the Haitians after that big earthquake. And he told me all kinds of stories. He said it was like the most devastating thing he's ever seen in his life. But I'm wondering, because I know US troops do missions like that. So I didn't know if they were trying to work out a plan with Netanyahu and who's it, Sisi of Egypt, in order to be able to operate on that Rafah Peninsula and that border crossing and work out some aid for the Palestinians down there.
So yes and no. So since the Hamas attack in Israel has, forbade the Egyptians from allowing any kind of aid into Gaza, and they have even threatened to bomb any aid convoys bringing aid into Gaza. So that is still the status quo. Washington is pushing Israel to give Gaza some aid, allow 5-10 aid trucks to come in. Of course, there's 2.3 million people in Gaza, and there's no water, there's no fuel. I should clarify, I believe that for a section of Gaza that they have, allowed water to be turned back on. However, now there's not fuel for a lot of pumps. And also, a lot of people don't have running water in their own home because either the infrastructure has been destroyed over past wars, or there's just, not that much flowing water, I guess, to actually pump it into the houses. So you have to go out to pump it.
Dave said it hadn't made much of a difference that he saw. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. So Dave already covered that.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit yesterday because I had heard about them supposedly turning it back on. But
yeah, I just like to qualify everything I say because somebody's gonna go, "Oh, this guy's making it up. They turned water back on to the Gaza." So
there's an area in South Gaza that they have turned the water back on to, and but because the electricity's out, they're having troubles getting the water to flow because a lot of their pumps run off of electricity. So there is an issue still with the amount of water. The one thing that I think it's hard for me because I look at it and I'm like, if I'm providing like these essential services to a people, and a radical group burrowed within those people attack me, the first thing I'm going to do is shut off those services and say, no, like, y'all take care of those people, get with us and taking care of that radical group of people, and then we can talk about how we're going to work out those services. So I do understand why Israel is taking the steps they're taking, as bad as it looks, and it's ultimately going to affect the citizens more than it's going to affect Hamas. I mean,
well,
ultimately.
Right. But so, I think this is a point I really like to make, which is, what does this really say about Gaza, though? The fact that Israel can at any time they want turn off the water, turn off the power, turn off the fuel, turn off the food. The people of Gaza really have no sovereignty. They have no freedom. They have no rights. They have no dignity, right? Everything that they have is what the Israelis allow them to have. And the Israelis have been explicit, right? Israeli officials have openly said that they only allowed the people of Gaza enough food to avoid a starvation crisis. So they made sure people have just enough, that there's not like, some massive Ethiopia looking situation where you have, children that, have like, these big heads and are wasting away. And it's just so horrible and so hard to look at, because that might start an international outrage. But, if you make sure that 50% of the population is unemployed, and that people don't have enough to eat, they don't have clean drinking water, the fishermen are constantly restricted how far off their own coastline they could fish. You're not allowed to just leave Gaza, right? Like if you're a Palestinian that lives in Gaza and say you have a really serious illness and need to go get medical treatment in the West Bank or East Jerusalem in a Palestinian hospital, you have to ask the Israeli government permission. And a lot of times they will just deny it. Or, if your child has like a cancer and they need to travel to one of those hospitals, they will deny you the right to travel with your child. So, in so many ways, the people of Gaza just, feel like they have absolutely no dignity, no rights. And look, it's referred to as an open air prison for a reason.
Yeah.
And
and I'm not defending it. I'm just saying, I mean, I kind of like in war times, like it gets brutal and things are bad. Like we saw what was happening with Yemen, the children dying of cholera, of all things. And it's just, it's terrible. And the citizens are the ones who suffer, the most,
I guess, the point I want to make wasn't that this was a unexpected move from Israel or anything like that. I'm sure Hamas and the people of Gaza knew as soon as the attack happened that this was going to be the reaction from Israel, because, it has happened time and time again in the past, but more that, the exact conditions that create a situation where you have enough young men, thousands of young men, who will go into Israel and wreak chaos and kill, innocent women and even children. That situation is created by forcing people to live in that kind of lifestyle. And so, the Israeli government doing this right after, in a lot of ways, just kind of confirms what Hamas is doing to the Palestinian people, right? That you don't have any rights because the Israeli government doesn't allow you to have them, or you only get them when, the Israeli government allows you to have any little bit of dignity and food and all that stuff. So, I think that's kind of important to point out. And then one of the things I want to mention about the airstrike and why I think it's so important for Israel to lie about that airstrike right now. So that strike happened a few hours, like probably just a few hours before Biden was going to hop on his airplane and fly to Israel to meet with Benjamin Netanyahu. And if it was confirmed that Israel had just blown up a hospital and killed 500 people, I think there's a very good chance Biden would have had to cancel that meeting. And that would have been a huge issue. Now, it wouldn't necessarily, people will be like, oh, what does it matter if Biden goes to Israel or not? In a sense, it doesn't, right? But then, it's a political issue. The Republicans are going to demand he should have gone anyways, and they're going to say assault on Israel. And then this is going to give the people who want the Biden administration to call for a ceasefire a lot of ammunition to do so. And we've seen in the past where, if you look at the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh, who was a veteran Al Jazeera journalist who was standing around with a couple of her colleagues in a helmet with press written on it and with a vest with press written on it in big letters, just standing there. She was shot in the neck by an Israeli sniper. And what did the Israelis say? Oh, there were some Palestinians shooting in the region, so it was probably them. And for weeks and weeks, when everybody would have been the most outraged about it, the Israelis lied and lied and lied and lied. And then when CNN came out and put out a report and said that, if you look at where the Palestinian fighters were, if you look at where the soldiers were, if you look at Shireen it was clear that the Israelis had gunned her down. But by that time, outrage time was over, and the only way you move US policy right now is by outrage, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, the reason that Biden shot down 3 hobby balloons over the skies of the United States was because there was so much outrage about the first Chinese weather balloon that flew over the United States that even the Pentagon says didn't collect any data and didn't have the ability to collect any data that Chinese satellites that are constantly over our heads don't collect anyways. You know, that hysteria drove Biden to then, you know, shoot down 3 balloons with missiles over the United States of America. And nobody's like concerned that the United States is shooting missiles over our own country at balloons, right? But, you know, that's because hysteria drives policy, and we're just supposed to be, you know, reactionaries to whatever thing makes us the most upset on TV or on the internet right now. And so Israel knows that they could kick the can down the road for a couple of weeks, then they could get away with it. And so I think that's a big part of what happened here, is that they realized that this was a huge catastrophe, and you know, they need to bury it. And you know, even if you're like, eventually the truth will come out, well, you know, by then a lot of people are going to be so ingrained in their belief they'll never believe. You know, there's still people that believe that Russia hacked the election, not influence the election. There are people that believe that Russia went and changed the vote count for Donald Trump in 2016. There are still people who will say that, and then at the same time say that the people from January 6th need to be in jail for denying elections, and oh yeah, Zelensky is the greatest champion of democracy in history. So yeah.
When we're talking about Biden's visit, there were a couple of meetings that he was supposed to have that got canceled. I think he was supposed to meet, was it with Jordan? And then who else was he was supposed to meet with?
I think Mohammed Abbas, who is the leader of the Palestinian Authority, was supposed to be there. Okay. And maybe Al-Sisi or Erdogan. I can't remember who all was supposed to be at that meeting. And of course, this was supposed to be important, right? In a big part, Daniel McAdams and Ron Paul. I mean, Ron Paul still kills it every day on the Ron Paul Liberty Report. You know, everybody's like, oh, Biden's too old to be president. Ron Paul is still doing a damn good job. Like, I know, you know, he's not the Ron Paul of 2008, and, you know, nobody is at that age, but he is still like well aware of what's going on in the Middle East and could certainly articulate all the issues better than Joe Biden can. And, you know, what Ron Paul points out is that, you know, this was supposed to like kind of be a balanced thing to the Middle East. He was supposed to go and talk with the Israelis and go and talk with the Muslims. And that way, you know, there's some kind of his, you know, avocation towards a ceasefire, right? And so, you know, that without the Arab meetings, without the Muslim meetings happening, then he's just going to meet with Netanyahu. And that, you know, takes away some of the American impartiality in the whole situation, at least how it's, you know, of course, going to appear to the Muslim people.
Do you think this is it's a big deal that the meeting got canceled because it could be a signal that there might be broader war brewing? Jordan might want to intervene, or something like that might be happening. We're seeing what's happening in Lebanon. Does that tie in the U.S. embassy being lit on fire? Does this tie in? Like, what is going on here in the thought processes of that region and the different Arabs of the region?
Okay, yeah. So no to war with Jordan or Egypt. You know, those two countries are well within the pocket. You know, they're in a very kind of weird way a part of the U.S. empire, you know, at this point. And not, you know, the people of Jordan or the people of Egypt, but, you know, the king who rules Jordan and the military dictator of Egypt, who, you know, swept to power in a military coup and then has locked up every single, you know, political opponent that he has had in the almost 10 years now since, right? So, you know, those two guys are firmly in the pocket. They receive, you know, $1 billion. Oh, Egypt gets $1 billion. I forget what Jordan gets, hundreds of millions of dollars in military aid from the U.S. every year. But there is a group of countries in the Middle East, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, that Tehran calls this the axis of resistance, and it views it as its Al-Quds force, which is kind of like Iran's military force that goes out in the region. Then it's the popular mobilization forces in Iraq. So these are the Shia militias. Kataib Hezbollah is one of the key groups, but there's I want to say at least 10 of these groups, but probably a few dozen when you count all the very small one militias that are made up of Shias in Iraq. And they existed during the Iraq Civil War after the US took out Baghdad and not Baghdad, Saddam Hussein, the Baghdad government, and disbanded his government and everything like that. These Shia militias formed then, but they really rose to prominence, and they got a lot of power and I guess a good reputation among Iraqis during the rise of the Islamic State, because they were pretty key to helping beat back the Islamic State, particularly out in, I believe, like what would that be, Western Iraq, like Tel Afar and those cities. The Shia militias went in there and they got rid of the ISIS guys. And so look, it's not that the Shia militias that do receive support, everybody likes to make it out that these all these groups that work with the Iranians, like the Shia militias in Iraq, the Popular Mobilization Forces, Assad in Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, just take orders from Tehran. That's not true. They act within their own interests, but they do act within coordination of each other as well. So, there's some complication, there's some nuance there. This group, actually, I just wrote up a story for the Libertarian Institute. If you go and look at the page today, it'll be there. It'll be on antiwar.com tomorrow. And two groups, one being complete Hezbollah, and then another Iraqi group launched a total of 3 drones at bases that house U.S. soldiers. So one is the big Al-Assad Air Base out in Western Iraq. 2 drones were fired there. One was intercepted successfully, according to the U.S. military. One was damaged and then injured coalition forces. And so when CENTCOM says coalition forces were injured, they're usually not talking about Americans. They're usually talking about Iraqis allied with the Americans. So some coalition forces received minor injuries. And then there was another attack at a Iraqi base that houses U.S. soldiers in northern Iraq, and that drone was also intercepted. But this is like kind of the first sign we're getting that these groups are going to start firing drones at U.S. soldiers. And so then when you move to Syria, you also have Shia militias. But the big kind of potential confrontation, of course, is between Israel and Hezbollah. And, this might be Lebanese Hezbollah, just, for any clarity, because you do have other groups in the Middle East who use the word Hezbollah in their name. And so this is, a very large, very powerful group. They're a large part of the Lebanese government. They hold a lot of power in Lebanon, and they hold a lot of military might. They have a lot of experience from fighting the Islamic State in Syria. They aided Bashar al-Assad's fight there, and they have hundreds of thousands of missiles that they could launch into northern Israel, and have threatened to do so if Israel launches a ground invasion of Gaza. And you mentioned that there was reports, I believe, in the New York Times. I may have this. No, I think I had this backwards. I think the New York Times reported that was weather that was causing the delay of the Israeli invasion of Gaza, the ground invasion. And the Jerusalem Post reported that it was actually the threats from Hezbollah that that they would go ahead and invade Israel, or at least, launch a lot of missiles into northern Israel should this heat up. And so I think there's a real potential for this to turn into a wider war, and very quickly, because Washington has threatened, it starts to sound like World War I, right? Washington has threatened that if Hezbollah attacks Israel in a significant way, because Israel and Hezbollah have probably there's probably about 20 dead soldiers in total, on each side from firing rockets at each other, missiles and things like that over the past week and a half now. So, there is important amount of fighting going on the Israeli and Lebanon border. But if that turns into a real war, Washington says that they will get into it on the Israeli side. And, at that point, Iran says the entire axis of resistance will be activated to carry out attacks on American troops across the Middle East. And so, of course, now we're looking at the popular mobilization forces basically having 2,000 Americans there either as targets or hostages, right? They have an overwhelming number of people in Iraq, and they could certainly launch an overwhelming number of, munitions, drones, rockets, missiles, small arms fire if they have to, get in actual firefights and try to either take captive or take out the thousands of American troops in Iraq. And of course, you have at least 900 American troops in Syria, and not to mention the thousands of American troops stationed in these, little Gulf fiefdoms like Qatar, the Emirates, Bahrain, which I'm also the Americans in Djibouti could also be, very easy targets. Mm-hmm. And of course, if these groups that the U.S. all deems, take orders from Iran, which again is blurry. But if they deem that all those groups are, taking directions from Iran at the U.S., then the U.S. is going to war with Iran. And so, this is a real disaster waiting to happen. And while there should be real calls for de-escalation and a real demand for peace here, not only just for the suffering Gazans and so that the people of Israel could start to return home, and especially the families that were victimized could start to rebuild their lives. We're looking at turning this into a Middle East wide war.
Do you think that Biden coming out whenever he was in Israel and saying that he's sending $100 million to Gaza for aid, that was kind of the cool off the Iranian side, the just kind of, hey, like, we're not like in entering the war right now, we're actually trying to like work out this humanitarian crisis at the moment?
No, that wasn't meant for Iran, that was meant for AOC and people like her, right? So
when did she get so much fucking power?
well, think about it though. They're talking about giving the Israeli military $10 billion, right?
Yeah.
And then they're going to give the Palestinians $100 million in aid. So they're giving the Israelis $10 billion to kill Palestinians, and then they're also going to allow a little bit of aid to trickle through the border. Look, there's 2.3 million people in Gaza. Those people don't need, they need a lot more than $100 billion in aid. I'm sure Israel's done well over $100 billion of damage to the Gaza Strip, and will continue to do more than that, 100 million to the Gaza Strip, and will continue to do more than that, with the American weapons that we're going to be sending them. So I think it's basically just something to tip to the progressive kind of wing of the Democratic Party to be like, oh, see, we do care about the Palestinians. I'm sure they're going to. So this is something else that really pisses me off for a lot of reasons. I'm blessed the Democrats and Republicans both here. So the Democrats are going to start whining pretty soon that, oh, man, the Republicans won't let the Palestinians come to the United States because they're all xenophobic bigots who think all the Republicans just think all the Palestinians are racist, right? That this is going to be what they say, which of course is stupid, right? What you should be complaining about is the fact that 2 million people are being displaced and can't just go back to living in their home, or to, they should be allowed to return to their ancestral lands and not be trapped in this tiny prison along the Mediterranean Sea, right? Like, this is completely ridiculous that what you're complaining about, the moral crisis that you're fixating on here, is that these people now have nowhere to go when the guy you voted for just endorsed the ethnic cleansing of them from the rest of their homeland. So, that's completely absurd. But on the other hand, the Republicans love to make this point that, oh, why don't the other Muslim countries just take in the Palestinians? And they think this kind of makes a few really good points. One is they think it says that all Palestinians are terrorists, right? And so even the other Muslim countries don't want them because they're going to be a problem. When, of course, 2 million people who are going to be perpetual refugees are going to be a massive burden on any country. And if you're talking about Israel, they're talking about leaving them out in the Sinai. So you're going to have 2 million people that are ruled by the military dictator General al-Sisi, living in poor conditions out in a refugee camp in the middle of the desert. Nobody wants that situation. It's a humanitarian crisis that's going to last for a century, right? That's why they don't want them there. And then, the same thing in Jordan. It's a lot of people. And of course, adding that many people really starts to change, political dynamics in those countries, which is why the Israelis don't want them there, because Israel wants to pretend like it's a democracy so it could get $4 billion in military aid from the United States every year. But they want to they don't want to let like 40% of the people who live in the border of Israel vote, because then it would change the results of their election. And then they would have to give rights to half of the people that they don't currently have to give rights to. So, but also, the Republicans don't realize, which is completely ridiculous. I mean, Tommy, you're from Texas. I know people from New Hampshire who have this attitude too, which is they would rather die defending their property than be driven off of it. That is their home. That is where their family lives. And they will be damned if anybody comes and tells them that they have to leave. Or, I know plenty of libertarians who say all the time that if the government came to take their guns, that they would shoot that government agent first. Well, they're coming to drive you off of the rest of your land, like of the land that goes back a millennia from your people. You don't think that the Palestinians think that's worth fighting over? You don't think that part of the reason that they don't want to go be Jordanians or go be Egyptians is because they're Palestinians and they want to live in Palestine? That's such an important part of this that Republicans don't give any credit to. They're just like, why don't you want to go live out in a refugee camp in the desert? And of course, that's another major problem too, is that the Palestinians in Syria and Jordan and all these other countries are listed as refugees, but they're never going to go home. And so that just puts them in a perpetual status of being poor forever, right? Where, you're really not established in the country area and you really don't have rights there, because eventually somebody says that you're going to get to go back to your home. But, where your home has now been turned into an Israeli settlement where Muslims aren't allowed, where Palestinians literally are not allowed by law to be there. And so, you're the country that has F-35s and is backed by the world empire says that you can never return to your home. So, this is this impossible situation, and putting another, 5-7 million Palestinians in that position by driving them further out of Israel is only going to, destroy the Palestinian people. It's it's really a destruction of an entire culture and entire people.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And, people get so bent out of shape, and it's like they fail. It's like here in the US, right? It's the separation between the government and the people, right? And so people automatically tie in the Palestinians to Hamas, or the Israeli citizens to the Israeli government. And it's like, not every Israeli citizen is a Zionist, right? Not every Palestinian is a terrorist, right? And so it's like people can't think that deep into the conversation and just examine what has been going on and who's doing what to who over the years. And these types of policies, as we've seen in the United States, ultimately do lead to terrorist acts, right? And a lot of the reason that the terrorism continues, and again, I'm not advocating for this, I'm just making a point, is prior to liberalism, that you do something like this, you're gone. Like it's over. There's nobody left. There's no lineage left to continue the terrorism, right? To be recruited into the terrorist activities. They would just completely decimate you. And I was talking to Matthew Ho last night with Kim Robinson. We did a show last night. I'll be releasing that possibly next week. It's not quite as time sensitive as these, but we did talk about this a little bit. And I was saying, I heard a guy say once, and that The reason that Afghanistan drew on for so long and the United States didn't win is because the United States doesn't have the stomach to do what it would take to defeat a force like the Taliban. And Matt was like, yep, that's it. Like, when you enter into that type of conflict, you have to be willing to go to places that most people are not willing to go and haven't been willing to go for many, many, many decades. And so you're talking about a type of barbarism that hasn't existed in a long time. And a lot of these terrorists are willing to cross that line because they're willing to do whatever it takes. And a lot of countries aren't willing to cross that line. The one thing I'm fearing, though, is with how bad this Hamas attack was on the Israeli citizens, that they may have backed Israel Netanyahu into a corner where he may actually cross that line this time.
So I guess a couple things on that. Netanyahu and the Israeli government for a long time have allowed Hamas to fester, and they've looked at Hamas as an asset.
They've paid them. They've allowed money to come in there. They've sent money to them, and they've done it because they didn't believe anybody in the world would observe them as a rightful government and then would justify Israel keeping the Palestinians in check the way they do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. It's one of those interesting facts, man.
Yeah. And look, and I guess, the other issue here too, is you're talking about 2 million people, which would be a lot of people to kill. And you're talking about a population where half of it is under the age of 18. And so I have to imagine that, there's a lot of young men who are growing up through this bombing campaign of Hamas. And I don't know if, they're going to be members of Hamas when they grow up. But they're certainly probably going to look towards the military, the sword to solve their problems.
What would you do? Let's say you're 14, 15 years old and your baby sister, you just watched her die, your mom die, and your dad die, and you're the only one left. Where are you going to turn? It's like the people that turn to gangs, right? Like, who's going to accept you? Who's going to make you feel like part of the family? Who's going to replace that familiar structure? That's how people fall into gangs and turn to that life of crime and violence.
Yeah. And just, the amount of anger that you carry as a young man, especially
you don't need any help.
You get older and, it starts to fade a little bit. You're like, oh man, I was really angry. You know what I mean? Like, just not having any constructive force in your life to kind of put that towards, right? We're talking about, again, a population where 50% of the people are unemployed. And so it's not like you could take all that energy and put it towards a job or creating anything, because there's really no opportunity. There's nothing to create in Gaza. It's basically just survive for another day. And then that combined with, again, you really don't have other opportunities. And when a very important event in Gaza was the 2018 Great March of Return, where the people of Gaza went to the fence of their prison with their hands up, and they were mowed down by Israeli snipers. Over 100 protesters killed. We're talking about people in wheelchairs, young children, not like a 13, 14-year-old, not somebody you could possibly mistake for, an 18-year-old at all. Young children, throwing rods 200 meters away, 300 meters away from a fence, and they hit them with sniper rounds. They shot medics in the back. People clearly dressed as medics, clearly dressed as press, murdered by the Israelis. And so, people all the time ask, why would anybody in Gaza either support Hamas or join Hamas? Why don't they, go the Gandhi or MLK route? Well, let's say that, MLK, during the famous, march he did, the police showed up and gunned them all down, right? Like, just showed up and gunned them all down. Well, I'm sure that's going to change the perspective of Black Americans on what they need to do to gain some liberation in the United States. And, that I think is a huge part of kind of the feeling in Gaza right now, is they've tried, they have legitimately tried the peaceful route, and were mowed down by sniper fire, with the Israeli government gleefully tweeting out after they, shot a child that they track where every single round goes. Right. And so it's very easy to talk about the barbarism of Hamas and what they're willing to do, because it's so much more disgusting, to our sensibilities in a lot of ways. The idea that, people were actually cut up, or, concert goers were shot up or something like that. But at the same time, like a sniper, a guy pointing a gun at a child, right, at a little boy, and then, his commander saying, take the shot, and him pulling the trigger, like,
Yeah,
that's
but
really sick and disgusting too.
it is, but I'm talking about beyond that. I'm talking about like near ethnic cleansing, like taking all the women as slaves and killing every male from infant to elderly. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like real, like old school, like what you would read about Genghis Khan doing type shit,
Right.
and that's where I fear this is going. I fear that's the path that Israel is on.
I'm terrified of that as well. And when I was recording my show this morning, I was talking about, seeing Netanyahu, or not Netanyahu, Biden, embracing Netanyahu in Israel, and, just kind of what it means to be an American right now, knowing that not that my government is necessarily ordering all of this, but certainly without the American blank check, this would be far, far less likely to be happening. And, Biden going over there and embracing Netanyahu and essentially giving this a green light to go on for another period of time is really disturbing. I mean, you look at the horrors of communism, right? What you're talking about, Tommy, what it's going to take to pacify the Afghan population. The Soviets killed 1 to 2 million of them. We killed 1 to 2 million Vietnamese, like 2 to 4 million people overall in the Vietnam War, and we didn't win those wars. And so, exactly how far are we going to see Netanyahu and the Israeli government go here? By the way, a lot of people in the US have gone to, oh, well, Netanyahu allowed this to happen because, they remember how the Americans responded after 9/11 in embracing George W. Bush and his poll numbers going up. Well, there's a lot of people in Israel who are actually blaming Netanyahu for this, and it looks like he would be out of office, after this war is over. And so what kind of incentive does that create for him to essentially, one, let this go on as long as possible? But I have a real concern that, let's say Netanyahu is worried that, his time in politics is up after this. He is no longer popular. He will be stained with this, Hamas attack on Israel that they called their 9/11 as being responsible. What might he do to create a different legacy? And how, maybe that is the ethnic cleansing of Gaza and finally resolving the Gaza situation. And even if that, it is like a, very final solution-esque kind of policy, you wonder if Netanyahu is willing to pursue that, not to let his legacy be in allowing Israel's 9/11 and then going to jail for corruption charges.
Right. Let's talk about what happened in Lebanon with the U.S. embassy. What kind of information you have going on there? Was that Hezbollah, or was that
I do not
random protesters? Do we know?
I don't have anything on that, actually.
You don't? Okay.
No, after you said that, I was actually thinking that after I got off the show, I'm going to first look to see if David Camp has written anything on it at antiwar.com. And if not, I'm going to message him and ask him what he knows about it.
Yeah, because that was one of the things, like there was so much like little stories today. You had the hospital, and then you had little bits and pieces around that. Then you had Biden visiting Israel, and you had all these little bits and pieces around that. And it seemed like it had to do with Biden showing up and embracing Netanyahu, and the Arab population in Lebanon getting really upset and just saying, screw the Americans, like, get their embassy out of here. And I don't know what kind of evacuation took place or anything like that. I haven't looked any further into it. I just kind of saw the story, I heard a couple of people talk about it, but I haven't looked at any depth.
There certainly has been protests, I know, outside U.S. and Israeli embassies across the Middle East. And so I would expect that to continue. I know there's, in the weird, like, global culture of governments, there's this, sacred vow to kind of, you're supposed to provide security for other countries' embassies and things like that. And generally speaking, I think that rule is often upheld. And so I would expect for the time being, at least for that to be upheld. Look, and I think probably like Hezbollah understands that killing American diplomats is a bad thing. I mean, raiding the embassy isn't, even if the US is running covert CIA operations out of the embassy, and even if that embassy in a way kind of presents a little bit of a threat and allows the American empire to have a little bit of a hand in Lebanon, I'm sure they understand that the alternative of, having a situation where they're dragging the body of the ambassador through the streets or something like that just simply is it's not worth the embarrassment. And so I would hope that in general the embassies are protected. And I mean, even in cases like was in 2020, the like riot protest outside the US embassy in Iraq, and eventually the Iraqi forces were able to like restore order outside and things like that. So I'm hoping, but who knows, like depending on how soon it comes out who was actually behind the attack on the Gaza hospital, if say that happens on Thursday night, Friday morning, and typically Muslims tend to protest in the Middle East on Fridays. That's just been a thing, like the Great March of Return. Every Friday they would go out and protest. Last Friday, the 13th, was supposed to be the Day of Rage, which everybody apparently thought meant that, every Muslim had received a secret order to go out and shoot up their local mall or everything. I've seen everybody post on Facebook, stay strapped, when, for them saying something like we're going to have a day of rage is like Donald Trump saying that we need to fight for our democracy. He's not ordering people to overthrow the government. He's telling people to go out and protest and, make some noise
Be
for
heard.
their cause.
Yeah.
Right. Be heard. Right. And to, express what they're upset about. And that's, kind of the same thing going on here. So let's say it comes out tomorrow that this was an Israeli strike. I could see things getting pretty hot and pretty nasty in the Middle East on Friday.
Yeah, because the last thing you want is a situation. What was that? What was the embassy that Hillary Clinton went on trial for that just got destroyed?
Benghazi and Libya.
Benghazi, yeah. You don't want that type of situation,
Absolutely,
because that, if you want America to get involved, that's the number one way to get U.S. troops invading Lebanon. I mean, seriously. And I don't think that's good for anybody. I honestly don't.
I agree with you on that.
So, all right. So other than that, I think, have we covered all the news? Is that everything that's happened over the last 24 hours?
That's pretty much everything that I am up to date on. Of course, there's news breaking all the time. And, again, news out of Gaza is really hard to get and monitor right now. I think a lot of people maybe thought that this would be like the war in Ukraine, where, early in the war, if you remember, there's like tanks driving through the streets and there's a bunch of different angles on this. Missiles are hitting buildings and, there's different angles and people are able to sleuth out, was this a Russian missile? Was this a Ukrainian air defense missile? That really isn't the situation in Gaza. Again, it's because of how much control the Israeli government has over the Gaza Strip and, how little the people there have, and even the ability to record their own destruction. Even in 2023 doesn't really exist all that strongly, or isn't that pervasive in Gaza.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why my wife gets, because my wife's South African. She gets so upset when people call it an apartheid state, because she's like, that's not what apartheid was. Apartheid was basically segregation. Like, that's a prison. Like, yeah, it's not the same thing, So she gets irritated about that. She's like, that's an Afrikaans word that means segregation. Like, quit using it to make it sound like this crazy pejorative, like it's something that's like exclusive to South Africa. So
I mean, there have been, Human Rights Watch, International, Amnesty International, one of the top Israeli human rights organizations, Beth Telem, the Office of the UN Secretary General, have all called Israel an apartheid state. But when they say that, they're mostly talking about the Arab Israelis, the Palestinians who are actually citizens of Israel and don't live in the West Bank, Gaza, or East Jerusalem. Or really, I think they're talking about the people who live in the West Bank, who live in East Jerusalem, who do live under like a segregated society, right? Like, these are people who in the middle of the night, the Israeli police will come into a Palestinian's home. They'll take their two youngest kids, tell the parents that they were throwing rots, hold them in a court with a bunch of Israeli military police, and then they'll give them a statement in Hebrew, a language that the kids don't even speak, tell them to sign it, and sentence them to a couple of years in jail. This is where they have roads that Israeli settlers are only allowed on. If you're a Palestinian, you're not allowed through it,
right.
or you have to go through certain checkpoints and things like that. And the way they have broken up the West Bank, where on the map it kind of looks like a giant like backwards B or a figure eight or something like that. Where now, if you actually look at where, like, if you were a Palestinian and wanted to walk from the southern half of the West Bank to the northern half, it would be a very complicated / impossible route at this time, because of how all the Palestinian towns have been broken up by Israeli settlements. And so they've intentionally made it so that, essentially there's a bunch of Bantustans in the West Bank, these little like isolated pockets of Palestinians. And so in the West Bank in particular, I think that is maybe useful to trying to get people to pay attention. Although all oppressive governments, have their own different flavors, and they act in different ways, right? The Palestinians aren't going to be oppressed in the same way that the Black Africans were. And that's going to be different than this example or that one in different ways. But just as I think of a way of generally explaining to people the problem with Israel is that you have one class of people, the Israeli Jews, who the Israeli government says the state of Israel is for, and then you have millions of other people who live there, who most of them don't have the right to vote, and they don't have basic human rights, including the right to keep your house. All the time they tear down these people's houses, and or there's even times where they will move a Jewish family from New York into a Palestinian's house in the West Bank, right? Like straight up theft of house property and everything, and just take it over. And so in certain areas it does, but I agree that like the situation in Gaza is far different than the situation from the people in the West Bank and how you would classify it and talk about it.
Gotcha. I didn't even think about it that way. I guess I just kind of would pay attention to what's going on, not really pay attention like closely, but I knew the general concept of what was going on in Gaza because Max Blumenthal's documentary, and I guess I assumed the West Bank was basically the exact same.
No, it's quite a bit different situation for a lot of reasons. Part of it is that you have, like, in the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority, and the Palestinian government is really willing to act in a lot of ways as like a proxy force of the Israeli government, right? And so, having Palestinians be willing to enforce law over a part of the West Bank creates quite a different situation. And just the amount of freedom and things like that the people of the West Bank have. And part of that is apparently, I don't have the exact quotes in mind for this, but the Israelis have taught a strategy of how keeping the Palestinians in like these separate classes with their own kind of separate struggles and separate forms of oppression keeps them separated, right? So the fact that the people of Gaza live in an open air prison versus how the people of the West Bank live, if Hamas, say, shoots off some rockets and Israel cracks down on the people and the Palestinians in the West Bank, well, then, to some extent, you might have people in the West Bank getting mad at Hamas and not the Israelis, because, the Hamas is the immediate reason that they're facing additional oppression from the Israelis, and they're not necessarily looking at the overarching system and the overarching enemy. And so, it's a way to divide people and segregate, even what should be like a collective group of the Palestinian people.
As long as this conflict has been going on, I mean, it's been going on for thousands of years. And I think I just find it to be counterintuitive to get involved, in any way. A lot of people want to start history yesterday. And there's no doubt you and I both would say what Hamas did was terrible. Just like when 9/11 happened, we said what Al-Qaeda did was terrible, right? I mean, we wouldn't never, but there is a history here, and there are things that have been going on and leading up to these events. And I don't see an easy way out of this. And I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. Hopefully I'm wrong. But
well, I think you're right about that. And one reason just for staying out is America, isn't perpetually going to be meddling in the Middle East forever. And so, best for America. I mean, it's not going to be possible forever.
It's been half of my life.
That's certainly not forever, though. And eventually, once America exits, then power will have to rebalance. And so allowing, people of the region to work on solutions, and, the closer you get to home, the better people understand these problems and think, if America is deciding how agreements get worked out in Ukraine or, in Syria, in Israel, in Haiti, or things like that, they don't know the first things about them. And the American leaders are subject to signing deals that come with the approval of the American people. And so, if the U.S. government is the one that has to mediate the conflict, the conflict between Israel and Palestine, and the American people don't understand that a core issue for the Palestinians is to, continue to live in Palestine. It's not, for the American public, a lot of the debate comes down to, do you want the Palestinians to live in America, or do you want the Palestinians to live in Egypt? Because they can't live in Israel. And the one thing the Palestinians want is to live in Palestine. And so, if the U.S. is brokering this agreement, the fact that the Americans don't understand the first part of the problem is going to make it so that, we never broker an agreement that is sustainable, that actually solves the problem.
Right. Well, and another thing I was looking at, and I just put my conspiracy theory hat on for this one, was the timing was crazy, right? The timing was insane, right? So you had a situation where the majority of the American people supported funding Ukraine. And then suddenly that poll flips, and it was something like, excuse me, 52% of the American people were against funding Ukraine. About a week after that, McCarthy gets booted out of the House, and then Hamas starts bombing Israel. So I can't help but think that once the American people get tired of funding Israel, the Kurds are going to be in trouble again.
Well, I think Taiwan is next, because the Biden administration's plan to solve their political dilemma, which was there was a small group of Republicans in the House that, so it's so stupid, right? It's all so stupid. If Ukraine really meant everything to the Democrats, you wouldn't think things like making sure the Pentagon could give women money to go to a different state to get an abortion for like the 12 times that probably happens in the U.S. military every year. So the Democrats won't vote for the bill that funds the whole Pentagon, plus I think it was like $24 billion of funding for Ukraine, because of social issues that the Republicans want to put in there. And the Republicans couldn't get enough votes to pass it because there's a small amount of Republicans that refuse to vote for the bill with any more Democrats. And so what is the White House solution? Well, we're going to have a massive $100 billion funding bill with $10 billion for Israel, $60 billion for Ukraine, a good chunk of money for Taiwan, and the border wall. And so world at war here, Tommy.
Yeah. Yep. That's it. That's the way it goes, man. One of the big fights between McCarthy and Gates was the apportionment issue, where you would apportion you would delegate a vote for each spending, bill. But that goes right out the window as soon as Israel gets bombed, and the Democrats and the Republicans start talking and saying, well, if we can mash up Israel, Ukraine, and the border all into one bill, like, everybody's happy, and it's like, no, that's not the way it works, man. I was actually pretty impressed with what Gates was doing whenever it came to pushing that apportionment issue. I was like, yes, that's what we need. We need that back. I mean, it was like that, up until 2009, it was like that. And then suddenly these ominous spending bills and all that crap came down. So
yep.
That's another story, man. That could send us down another rabbit hole. Why don't you I think this is good information for right now. If I need to get in touch with you again in the next couple of weeks, I know how to reach you. So plug away and tell everybody where they can find you and read your writings and everything that you're doing.
All right. Well, like you, Tommy, I work at the Libertarian Institute, and so you can find pretty much everything I do at the Institute. I am the news editor there. So most days of the week, I do write a couple news stories. On the weekend, I fill in writing news at antiwar.com. So Friday, Saturday, if you're looking for anything I'm writing, it's going to be fresh over at antiwar.com. Usually throw it up on the Institute page Sunday, Monday. And then other than that, I host Conflicts of Interest with Connor Freeman, and I'm the opinion editor at antiwar.com. That's my other day job. So if you go antiwar.com, you look at the viewpoint section in the spotlight article every day. Usually 2 or 3 of those articles are going to be things we print as originals from antiwar.com, submissions that we get that we think are really good. And so we'll go ahead and print them. And then we'll also link to 2 or 3 of the other very best articles on foreign policy from anywhere. Sometimes it's the Mises Institute, sometimes it's the Ron Paul Institute, sometimes it's the Libertarian Institute, and sometimes it's the Gray Zone or the Quincy Institute. Don't discriminate. It's antiwar.com, and so we really mean it. We're going to give you the very best anti-war content every day of the week. And also, if you go to antiwar.com, you should go every day because Dave DeCamp is there writing news stories. Just it's so much work. I covered for him for a couple days after he had his second kid recently, and let me tell you, this guy puts in an incredible amount of work. I didn't even touch the amount of articles that Dave actually writes in a week, and it was still a lot. So be sure to read what Dave's doing, because he puts a whole lot of work into it. And you could really go through and read all of his articles in probably like 15 minutes every morning. Because he does a really good job of giving you a summary and giving you exactly, the words and the details that you need.
Yep. Well, a man of many hats is just running around, just making his way through this crazy world. So I appreciate you coming on, man. I'm going to stop the recording, and I'll have all your links in the show notes.
Appreciate it, Tommy.